Today's tutor, Sarah Reeve, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year in 2023, producing a bold yet intimate portrait of award-winning businesswoman Vanessa Kingori, who was a big fan of the painting.
I'm going to go for Sarah's.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. It means so much. Thank you.
As were we judges.
Sarah Reeve.
Which earned her a place in the semi-final. There, she upped her game with a painting of former Spice Girl Emma Bunton.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home, exactly.
Love it.
And charmed her with a finished portrait.
I love the colours you've used, the bright pink behind instead of the red, actually. It is very me.
Sarah's mastery of large brush strokes produced powerful portraits.
It's OK because I bought my big decorator's brush to fill in the gaps.
Makes her the ultimate tutor for today's masterclass, loosening up.
Today we're going to be looking at how to loosen up. It's something that people often say, especially when they've sort of maybe had a little bit more experience of painting, that they're starting to feel like their paintings feel a little bit too tight or a bit too controlled. I've found that this is often because people use really tiny little brushes a little bit too soon. So what we're going to do today is be brave, and we're going to just use one big brush for the whole of one painting. We've got a great reference here of my good friend and lovely model, Jade. She's got quite a glowing skin tone, so let's get started on our initial marks that we're going to make. So I'm going to be using burnt sienna. It's a very, very thin mix, just to get that starting part down on the page. So what I'd really like you to focus on is almost as if we're sculptors. So imagine that you've got like a big piece of marble or a block of wood in front of you, and we just want to start making those initial marks. I'm using here a really cheap and cheerful decorator's brush. It's a 1.5-inch decorator's brush. It really isn't going to allow us to be too precise at all. And I haven't soaked it in solvent, but just enough to start making those initial sort of carvings in. So what I'm wanting to focus on here is just really the large shapes of dark and shadow on Jade's face. It's a great reference image, this one. We've got some really nice kind of tonal contrasts. But as you can see, I'm not getting too fussed about kind of the positions of the eyes or the nose or the mouth. I'm just following my way around the reference image and really focusing on these key shapes that I can see here. So this is very sort of provisional marks at this stage, and I'm not worrying too much about likeness. As you can see, the brush isn't letting me do much more than just put in some very, very provisional marks. So have a bit of fun with this stage. So you'll see a face is slightly appearing. I'm not getting too fussed at the moment about whether there's a real likeness or anything. I'm just really still trying to look at these key areas of light and dark that I can see here in the reference image. We're keeping it nice and light, so I'm going to be able to go back in it in a minute with a slightly a slightly more decisive brush than my decorator's DIY brush. Okay. So at this stage, as I say, we're just treating it as if this was like a big sculpture. I want to get something onto the white of the paper that's going to give me a bit of a map to work with as we're going round. So the brush is already sort of surprising us with what it's doing. I might put a little bit here just to give a bit of an indication of some sort of background. OK, so now if you were starting off with a tiny brush, you wouldn't have done this drawing. So it's already forcing us to embrace what the brush has done. It's made some marks we might not have expected, and we're going to have to work with it now. So next stage. So I've picked this brush here. This is going to be my brush of choice. So when we're doing a big brush painting, sort of pick one that you perhaps wouldn't use. This is like the larger end of my scale. It's a 1.5-inch synthetic flat brush, quite boingy, quite versatile. This brush is going to do a lot more than you think it can. So I'm going to kind of just start by, again, I just want to sort of map for something that I can come in with later. We've got our initial marks that I've made underneath with our sort of initial blocking in, but I'm not religiously sticking to that. I'm feeling like I can still start making some precise marks. And I want to notice as well that I'm standing up whilst I'm doing this, OK? I'm not like this. I'm not signing a contract with my face right next to the thing. I'm standing back a little bit. I'm giving my arm a bit of flexibility, and I'm giving myself the scope to make some marks. So we're not seeking perfection. Remember, I do quite like setting a goal for each painting, and I like to sort of think, like, what am I going to achieve from this? So our goal today for this painting is literally, we're going to do one painting with one brush, and it's a big brush. So that's our goal. What you need to do at this point is squint. And I know it's not the most flattering of things to do, but if you really, really squint, or if you wear glasses, take your glasses off, because you need to see this in sort of shades of dark and light. That's what we're looking for. I'm not looking at each individual hair on her head. I'm looking for sort of key shapes of light and dark. And the brush is really going to only allow me to do that. Ooh, now look, see, now here's a thing. Can you see this? This is what I'm really enjoying about just using one brush. Rather than kind of ducking out and thinking I'll use something else, this brush is already giving me something I wasn't expecting. And particularly when it comes to hair, can you see there's these marks? Oh, who'd have thought a big brush could be this exciting? Like, look at this. So that's not something I would have been able to achieve with like a small brush. I'd have over-noodled it. It wouldn't have really worked. But look, there's some really dynamic mark making here. And that's what we're going to try to do today, is preserve these initial marks that we're making. So what you'll notice is I can't be that precise, all right? The brush is loaded with paint. It's got some solvent on it to help it move around. I'm having to sort of go with what's happening. I haven't got a plan of how this is going to look in the long run, and that's part of this exercise, is taking a lot of the control out of our hands. And if you're finding as you're working and you're working your way around the face that you've perhaps got a line that you didn't quite think was in the right place, that's okay. You can use a little bit of solvent on your rag. You can kind of just knock it back slightly. We're still working quite lightly with the paint. We haven't gone in too hard, and it's still quite a lovely sort of warm bronze colour underneath, which suits Jade's skin tone. So just make those corrections. This is our opportunity to do this now, before we start putting the colour on, and keep working your way around the face. So as you can see, I'm not going to get fixed on one area. I've not stayed here or here. I'm seeing everything as a whole. I'm continuing to squint to try and see these large shapes of light and dark. I've just got a couple of colours mixed up now. So the big brush so far is serving me well. Let's keep going. I'm going to start off with this shape here, the area around the hair. I wouldn't use black straight out the tube. I like to make my own black up, but I'm actually going to knock this back into a sort of more of a brown colour. We're going in with the big brush, OK? So it's a 1.5 inch. It's going to make quite a broad stroke. This is going to be my darkest colour that I can see. And I'm just going to try and follow the sort of tonal map that we've decided down here I tend to work from dark to light, especially when you're working with a big brush, because they're quite thirsty things. They do drink a lot of solvent and paint. So my recommendation would be that you don't mix yourself a tiny little pile of paint each time. Mix a reasonable amount because you're going to need it. Let's have a look at these shapes. And I can see that it's slightly darker here than is this section here. If I'm really squinting, this is the sort of darkest section here. So I'm just going to keep my attention on that for now. It's a really lovely shape. I love this ear. I'm obsessed with ears at the moment. And what's really good fun, and I'll show you later, is that you can kind of achieve a really convincing ear with a very small amount of brush strokes. Simplicity is going to be the key. And that's what's so great about a big brush. You really can use it to just kind of simplify things and surprise yourself with the marks that come out of it. Now, I was quite enjoying the way that these sort of marks were coming, so I don't want to totally paint over them, but maybe just use them as a bit of inspiration. And can you see you're covering a lot of space really quickly? So it's becoming quite an exciting method. If I was using a teeny tiny little brush, if you think sometimes people get, feel like their paintings are too tight, too controlled, if they're using a brush that's kind of only that size, like a little cocktail stick with 3 hairs sticking out of it, that would take quite a while to cover that area of paint. But as it is, we've managed to kind of create quite a sort of nice, loose, flowing feel of hair, which is fantastic. I'm going to leave, maybe I might just indicate that the hair's coming in here, but again, look, I'm using the brush. That stroke isn't something I'd have been able to achieve with a normal brush. I'm using this brush in a different way, and I've got this really, the way that hair actually feels like it's coming out of your head. So you can see here on Jade's head here. So I've just mixed up a slightly lighter shade now of this shadow here, because it's not quite as dark as the darkest darks here, but it is a little bit lighter. I'm just going to go in here and just try and see if I can really refine that line. And I'm not getting too fussed at this stage about the difference between eyebrows or eyelashes. I'm just using this as a shape to kind of get these shadow shapes in here. So one thing that's really important when you're using a big brush is if you're only going to use one brush for the whole painting, I would suggest you make sure that that brush is kind of white every time that you put it into a new colour. So you can see I'm just really making very sort of broad colour suggestions here, and I'm really focusing on this simple area on this side here. You'll be surprised how little information you need to give to indicate something. Our brains are very good at seeing faces and at making up kind of the rest of the content. We don't need to give the viewer of our painting everything. This brush isn't letting me outline every little detail. So in a way, this is proving to be my friend. But you can see how just these kind of little patches of colour added in can really give the indication of a face, or the eye that's sort of falling behind into the shadow, without having to over-detail. And that's what we're trying to loosen up with today. We're trying to loosen up from that really tight control that people get. And I do understand it. Like, when you really care about your painting, you really want to, like, oh, I want it to be perfect. But sometimes you just got to try and just be like, maybe it won't be. Maybe it won't be perfect, and that's okay. I would say at this stage, this is the point where I usually think the painting looks completely bananas. The colours are kind of everywhere. There's not sort of as much expression as I'd like. I do have a bit of a tendency to kind of want to control, you know, things and get into the details. So this is why these sort of exercises are so good for me. You just got to trust it. The brush is going to see us through, I promise. So one thing that's really important when you're painting a portrait is do not forget the background. I have to say, I've heard people say that the background is like the secondary character in your portrait, and it can really make a huge difference to your figure, so don't forget it. So because we're still working with one big brush, there's a limit as to how kind of detailed we're going to get. There's also not that much going on in this background, so we're going to try and stay fairly true to our reference. I've mixed up a nice sort of stage of this nice kind of slaty grey. So I'm going to do something called like a ribbon background. We're going to use a nice big brush and literally just kind of mark our way around the face. So it's a really good opportunity to just define your lines, really observing and paying close attention to this jawline here. Just got some quite subtle changes in direction. Whether or not I'll be able to achieve that with this brush remains to be seen, but I'm questing for it. So I'm going to sort of really do my best to seek out that difference. So as you can see, I'm not going fully all up to the edges. I'm just going to create this ribbon of grey that's going to read all the way around Jade, and it will just set our portrait into a context, but it still keeps that kind of loose, expressive, undone feel. So there's a number of problems when we're using one big brush and you're mixing a lot onto the paper. It ends up being a little bit muddy or a bit flat. I would be really cautious of using too much white as a top tip that you can take home. Often people, when they want to lighten something, you'll add white to it. But actually white can be quite flattening. It can make things go quite cloudy and kind of can take a bit of the light and character out of something. So in this case, I've used quite a lot of, say, yellow ochre. So that can be quite a good, it's a lighter shade, it's a yellowy shade, but it isn't quite as cloudy and harsh as the white that we've got. White's super useful, but we very rarely use it just straight onto our painting. One of the main things really about this is that it just probably will look a bit weird. You're using like a really big brush. It's probably very out of your comfort zone, kind of proving to ourselves that we can do it. So one problem that I often encounter in my paintings, and you may well do as well if you have pets, is that I invariably end up with some sort of pet hair in my painting. And so it's nice that my dog feels like he could have accompanied us today, but I don't necessarily want that in this painting. So don't be afraid of just reaching in and grabbing things out if they're not quite in the right place. I'm just making that go away. We've covered the eye here quite loosely, to be honest. There's not really much on, but your brain, as I said before, is very good at making up the gaps. We're working out kind of, we know that there's two eyes, a nose and a mouth going on. So one of the real challenges of using this great big brush is that when you want to get into the detail, it feels a bit sort of like you're like this with it. And so we're just going to explore now how you can do small details with a big brush. So I'm just going to do a really simple exploration of this ear. There's quite a lot of blood that usually goes through an ear, which I quite enjoy. And the ear is kind of like, you know, it's not the main event. It really isn't. Your eye's going to be drawn to the nose and the mouth and the eyes. So because we've got this ear here, we can have a bit of fun with it. So I'm always a big believer of like seeing how few brush strokes you can kind of get involved. So far we've used one. The big brush is going to make us do whatever we want, you know, it'll have something to say. And that's kind of part of the fun of oil painting, that you're letting the paint have a bit of input into the painting. So you can see here, I'm just getting some quite thick, gloopy paint, which I'm quite enjoying. Now, if I was working with a little brush, again, I'd be like, I'd be probably trying to get too precise into here. I don't need to do that. I can do this with a brush. I'm just trying to simplify it. Ooh, let's do something a bit more jazzy. We'll give a little section of the ear just here, the dark bit just there. Sort of, we just nod a wink to it. So that's 4 brush strokes that we've done there, and we're now going to finish off, I think, with just a little bit of the kind of added section, just to calm that down a little bit. So these are just our finishing touches to the ear. And because the paint's really wet here, it's really, really juicy paint, the brush is really piling it on, I'm having to be very decisive about the mark making. So my brush discipline is coming in to the fore. Great. Let's just connect that ear to the head, because at the moment it feels a little bit like it's sitting slightly separate. So with that ear, the base of the ear that I've just painted there, the kind of key paint that I've used for that is cadmium red. It's got this kind of fresh, warm feeling to it. OK, so I think I'm probably reaching that stage where I'm finished. I could keep going in and in and in, but actually the brush sort of won't allow me to. It'll just get more muddy and confused as I go. So I just wanted to have a little quick chat with you and just really observe all the different brush strokes that we've made today with this big brush. I'm really enjoying what's happened here with the brush marks, the hair kind of feeling like it's coming out of the head. We enjoyed our splodgy feature ear that we worked on, very few brush strokes. One thing I really am a big fan of, and I'm going to let everybody do this, is you can actually use the end of your brush. Ha-ha, I didn't say you had to use just the top bit. You can use that bit as well. And we might be able to see if we can just get a little highlight into Jade's eye. Don't go mad with this, because you could find yourself just doing a drawing all on top with the end of the brush. That would be cheating. So I can see just this little subtle glimpse of that burnt sienna underpainting come through, which makes that eye feel a little bit more whole. And also edges. So I'm also a bit of a one, because this is our sort of finishing touches now, of a bit of finger painting. So, so a really good thing I like to do is just to smudge these edges so that it doesn't feel like such a broad shape. So I'm just going to smudge this section here underneath the chin. Trying to make sure my finger's not completely clean and completely dirty, and then smudge that bit down there as well. So can you see it just softens it a little bit? It stops it being too stuck on. I'm just going to review the rest of the painting. This top area up here, it's just feeling a little bit stuck. So we're almost kind of applying that depth of field that you might see in photography or kind of filmmaking, where we don't want everything to be in focus. But try not to overdo it. It gets very tempting just to do the whole thing like this. So don't do that. I think we've met our goal today. We've managed to achieve a whole painting just using one big brush. Step outside your comfort zone. I think you'll really be impressed with the results. You'll surprise yourself with what the big brush can do. I promise you, I'm going to convert you to being a fan of big brushes.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor is Portrait Artist of the Year winner, Gareth Reed, who caught the attention of us judges with charcoal drawings of broadcaster Adrian Chiles and actress Imelda Staunton. He further impressed with portraits of actor Tom Courtenay and High Court Judge Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb.
It's just fantastic. This is an absolutely exquisite finished piece of art.
Winning him a commission to paint broadcaster and comedian Graham Norton for the National Gallery of Ireland. In 2023, he created a tender and serene portrait of actor Dame Judi Dench, which secured him the title Portrait Artist of the Decade.
Gareth Reid.
Gareth's drawings feel almost carved,
It's sort of sculpted, isn't it? I think he really elevates the humble pencil.
which is why he is leading today's masterclass, observing facial features using abstract shapes.
Today I'm going to help you achieve a likeness in your portraits by breaking down facial features into abstract shapes. I kind of tend to think of the whole face as being an interlocking series of shapes in a kind of a jigsaw, so hopefully today we'll help you solve that puzzle. I'm working at the easel, which is the way I tend to work because I feel like you can just get back from your work a lot. And it also makes it very easy for you to compare this to this. The easel is a little bit low, so I'm going to like raise it up a little bit. So that feels comfortable. It's in my kind of eye line and shoulder height. It's a comfortable way to draw. So I've chosen this photo of my daughter. I think it's appropriate for today's lesson because her features are quite clear, so it's easy to focus on them. I've made it black and white, so it's easy to convert into a black and white drawing. That part of it's done. A lot of this is making it as easy as possible with your reference. And yeah, I think she's just got a lovely look. She's my daughter, obviously, so I'm biased, but yeah, I think it'll make a nice portrait. So I'm going to make a start. I usually look for a kind of strong line, which is I kind of think of as an anchor point. So that could be the hair. It's a very bold line, so I would kind of start with that. And then go from there. I'm going top of the head, quite loose. And down the side of the jaw. Now, the way I draw is I try and think objectively or look at the shapes objectively, not think about what they are, but just how they look. So the whole shape of the face, that's one big shape, and then there are smaller shapes within that. If you get the bigger shapes right first in a really simple way, then it's easier to get those small shapes within correct as well. So the issue with drawing features is that they're sensory parts of our body. We look into each other's eyes when we talk with our mouths. So these are all very, very important parts of the face to us. But they're not more important than, say, the cheek, forehead, the chin, the lip. They've got psychological importance. So sometimes we give them too much importance. We focus on them and they end up floating on their own without being connected up by all these parts here. So to avoid having the features just floating as islands within a kind of blank face, not connected up, we would start to think of them as shapes that are all interconnected with the cheek, the forehead, the chin. So then they become a believable head with parts that are joined up and anatomically correct. So when we think of the eye, it's not just the eye, it's that whole eye socket. So the eye socket relates to the corner of this part of the hair. It comes down like this. It's easy to draw or measure little jumps instead of a jump from here to here, say. It's easy to measure this from here to here. So already, just by putting in the hairline, we kind of know where the eye socket starts, which is right here. I'm just kind of feeling my way around at the minute. These lines are so light that they might end up moving eventually, but I think that the eyelid is roughly here. One important thing is always checking proportion sideways to height. So at the minute, so using a long implement can be anything. I'm looking at from the side of the ear to the furthermost point on the right-hand side of the face. Then I'm comparing that to the height. So I'm going right down to the chin, and that equals, this width equals just slightly above the eyebrow. So if I look at my drawing, I do the same. So that measurement seems correct. And then if I go down to the chin, it should end up slightly above the eyebrow, which checks out. So I'm kind of happy with that proportion, that big proportion. So that's big shapes, trying to get those big shapes right first, and then we go into the smaller shapes. So if I know that the proportion from here to here works out from here to here, then I'm quite happy. Okay, at this point, things are generally in the right place, but there's something wrong, and I can't really tell what it is. In my studio, I do this all the time. I look in the mirror, I flip the canvases or the drawings upside down all the time as a tool to help me find out what's wrong if I can't really see what it is. So we're at that point right now. There's something to do with the shapes around here. When I turn it upside down, I can see them afresh. So I should be able to see these as kind of abstract shapes as opposed to my brain taking over and seeing a mouth, a nose, a cheek. So hopefully this will help. It usually does. Okay. I'm just looking at these over this side of the face here, these shapes. Suddenly they become, because it's turned upside down, it's removed us from the knowledge of what features they are there. So I can see this shape here more clearly. And if I compare it to my own, so I'm going to need to take away this, make this line a bit thinner, take away the outside edge of it. Also, the chin isn't quite right, so I'm going to look at that as well. So I've attended to the bits that I thought were a bit dodgy. I'm going to flip it again to see whether they've worked out or they need some more attention. But yeah, let's flip it back the way. Okay, standing back. Yeah, I think that's it's a bit better. The mouth here needs some attention, but this whole area, I'm much happier with this. I feel like it's a bit more accurate. So this reference here is very zoomed in. It doesn't quite have the rest of the hair. So I've got another photograph here which includes the hair and the shoulders. So I'm just going to use it to give my drawing a bit more context, because otherwise it's just focused on this. We don't want that. We need hair and shoulders. So I'm just using it briefly just to mark where the shoulders are. At the moment, I've got the nose blocked in, but it's not that accurate at the minute. So now is the really time to really, really look at it in depth. So instead of thinking about what a nose is with nostrils and that kind of thing, I'm just going to look at how the lines come down and think of them again in abstract shapes. Yeah, it's like a little curved, little grey shape here. Then it comes round, curves over the nostril here. Then there's another line, another little shape that comes up like this, which forms the kind of bulb at the end of the nose. This line curves underneath here and up. There's a little dip just here in the nose, here, which is important. Another very, very subtle shape here. And the thing is, if you trust all of these shapes and you draw them accurately, they end up making a nose or making an eye or making a mouth without you even thinking what that thing is that you're drawing. And you're starting to get a kind of 3D effect. It's still at a subtle stage, but you're starting to get a feeling of this nose having form and it kind of being believable, which is what we want. And then just looking over at this on the right-hand side into this cheek shape, I'm really not thinking about that as being a nose. I'm not thinking about this being an eye. I'm not thinking about this being a cheek. I'm just purely looking at this weird shape here. So I regard that as the big shape in this as we're drawing. And then within it, we've got smaller shapes like the shadow shape. If I'm quite confident, and I'm 90% that this is okay, this shape, I can then look within it and start drawing the other smaller shapes within it. But it goes big shapes to small shapes. Got to make sure the big ones are right before you go on to the smaller ones. A way of getting a likeness is this way of using abstract shapes to observe things coolly, in a kind of way that, especially if you know the person, like my reference here is of my daughter, but honestly, I've seen this wee face like 1,000 times. I know it very well, but I'm never once thinking of her as like a look that I've seen or that's my daughter. I'm thinking completely, utterly clinically about the shapes. All of this helps in seeing somebody in an accurate way. I think when a portrait has been commissioned, then the necessity for likeness is much higher. Whereas when it's your own work, it doesn't matter so much. And also likeness takes different shapes and forms. And it doesn't need to be a photographic likeness. It can be like the person, but not necessarily look really, really specifically like them visually. Could be the way they sit. Mostly in commissions, you need to get it like the person. So that's where the challenge lies. Negative shapes, again, is a very, very important tool to use when you're trying to draw a thing that you're very, very familiar with or you find difficult. The negative shape is the stuff that's around the thing that you're drawing. It's the space that's around it. So you're drawing the stuff that isn't the thing that you're drawing. In this case, it's the black shape of the hair. And by doing that, you kind of accidentally draw the ear. In this case, we've done it here. So we just follow this line round that was this shape here. We're not thinking of the inside, we're thinking of the outside. And we end up with an ear. Okay, this is the stage where we start to really try and make the head convincing, and that means working with the forms using shadows, and that means shadow shapes. So we are looking specifically, I've left this bit, which is around the chin, so we can see, if you look at the reference photograph, you can see this curved shape here. Okay, so I want to try and replicate that in my drawing. There's another more subtle one. So this is the main shadow shape. You see it come around like this. It comes up here as well, but I've already done that. here, but there's another more subtle one which goes like this here. And we've got a light part here and a light part here. All of the rest of that is going to be shaded. I'm going to first of all tackle the darker shadow shape. Also, the way I shade a lot of the time is in a kind of a directional way. So it kind of gives a sense of a real sculptural quality of the head. So I'm kind of drawing, the lines are all kind of follow the chin around. So they, at this point, they go diagonally. At this point, they come this way. So you're kind of feeling around the shape of the chin. Okay, stand back a bit. Okay, it needs to go much darker. We've got a little bit of light in here that we want to, it's not light, it's just a lighter part. So the lip, looking at this shape here, the upper lip comes down. This is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of shapes. This is really, really critical, but it doesn't look like a mouth at all. I'm not thinking of that as a mouth. I'm thinking of it as a little kind of right angle shape there, okay? And if you draw that accurately, it looks like a mouth at that angle. So it comes across, and then there's quite a strong line going vertically there. Completely abstract. Not thinking about it as a lip at all. The darker part of that shadow. And all the rest of it just gets filled in. Now the kind of secondary bit of shading, which is of this bit, leaving us the two light bits here and here. I need to take out a little bit here, just to make that light a bit clearer. So again, in that kind of directional way of shading. You can hardly see the difference between this and this. So it's the same on your drawing. So a lot of the time you feel like you're drawing and there's nothing like showing up on your page, but it appears eventually. Very, very light, holding the charcoal very, very lightly. And we're getting there. It's starting to have some kind of form. Okay, so we've got to the point where I've blocked in the hair a little bit, but I haven't really done very much with it. I found in the past, when I was teaching portraiture, I found that my students focused on hairs, not hair. So that was what I used to always say is hair, not hairs. So it's mass instead of individual hairs that are drawn. So it's got a top, a side, it's got light reflecting on it, just like the rest of the face. So it's got form. Just like the chin that we described, there's a shadow shape. And the shadow shape kind of goes something like this, just in a very simple way. Because we're not going to be too precise about it for this drawing. We're going to give an indication of what's going on with the light on the hair. So that's where the shadow stops in the hair. It's done like that. The light is hitting here, and then it goes dark again, kind of up here. And then there's a bit of light here, and then dark everywhere else. If we show that in a really simple, indicative way, you just get a sense of it being a solid mass that's kind of on top of the head, as opposed to something that you haven't really given much thought to. I don't really know the anatomy of the ear, but all I do is draw these shadow shapes inside it, like that, as accurately as I can. And hopefully, because I've done the outside of the ear fairly faithfully, this will be fairly straightforward. It's really no more than a kind of indication of what's there. Just for a drawing like this, it's pretty sketchy. I'm just kind of giving an indication of what the interior of the ear is like. So a couple of these shadow shapes is fine for my purposes. Okay, so I think that's it finished now. I'm quite happy with the likeness. The features I feel are accurate. And also one of the important things that I was talking about was that they join up. They make something coherent. They're not just floating by themselves. They're joined by an eye socket, cheek, cheekbone, upper lip, chin, forehead, whatever. Hopefully you found it helpful to see facial features as abstract shapes, and that ensures you get a likeness more easily. Try that at home, and good luck.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Fujiko Rose, gained a place in Landscape Artist of the Year in 2019 and went on to win her heat in Gateshead, where she brought a timeless quality to the city's Millennium Bridge.
The way in which she's used the white of the paper to define the arc of the bridge, it's very elegant.
In Cromarty, her evocative drawing captured the haunting beauty of the oil rigs.
It was really about an artist responding to what she was seeing. I've never seen any work like it.
And after a long night in Battersea, her striking night view of the power station and a breathtaking commission drawing of Lantony Priory ultimately won Fujiko the Landscape Artist of the Year title.
It's just really fitting that we've got an artist who's ready to go out and do it properly.
She headed to Venice to paint her prize, a £10,000 commission for the Royal Institute of British Architects, inspired by Victorian painter John Ruskin.
I think Ruskin would be pleased.
Known for her elegant floral designs painted in intricate detail, Fujiko will take us through today's masterclass, Botanical Flowers.
Today I'm going to show you one of the ways in which I'd approach doing a botanical drawing with ink. It's going to be monochromatic and a little bit of a mix of brushwork and pen work, and so I'm just going to show the different ways you can create texture and really play with your artwork. So the first step is I always start with pencil, because ink is one of those things, once you've put it down, you've got to commit. And so it's always best to map everything out first, do a kind of skeleton sketch that you can then follow with your ink. I've got this reference image here, and so I just want to do a little exercise just to show if you're not comfortable with certain elements like these flowers, or maybe this leaf is a bit complicated and it's at a funny angle, then you can just kind of do a quick practice first. So always note where the center of the flower is, in relation to this kind of outer petal, I'm actually going to put my pencil to paper, or maybe even a pen so you can see. So you can kind of see where this is positioned in relation to the outer circle, because sometimes it's not where you would expect. So if I say, even from the start, go with this kind of circle, and then do the inner circle, so you've got this little kind of egg going on. And from there, you can figure out where the petals go. And something important is don't be overly perfect about it. You know, it's grown naturally. We don't want it to look manufactured. It can look a bit ugly for a bit. That's quite normal. It's part of the process of drawing. There is quite often an ugly stage, and you've got to sort of trust the process. I've very much almost given up on some pieces midway and still love the final result, so it's good to troop through. And it's just very rough. It's not beautiful, but the point is we're going to work on ink on top of that. And so at the moment, you don't really want to spend too much time on it. So I'm going to actually just start with mapping out on this piece of paper. The focus of this piece is these flowers, really. And so I'm actually going to pop those where I want them to be, and I'm going to build up around it. So let's say I have flower 1 here. Usually I would do like a layout sketch, but for this, I'm not too fussed. You know, it's almost as if in your garden and you are just sketching from life, and, you know, you don't need to overthink too much. And so first, I'm just doing these kind of big circly things. So nice swooping motions for these stems. I'm not going to include all of these leaves because there are so many. And I purposely brought a very busy reference because I wanted it to be almost that if you're looking at a reference in your garden or at a local park or something, you can see how you can edit that down. And so going in with these leaves, try to look at it as shapes rather than thinking, oh, right now I'm drawing a leaf. Sometimes it helps. So now that I've got things kind of roughly mapped out, it's good to have an idea of where you want to have your highlights and which areas are going to be darker. And it's not always immediately obvious because this is a color image. Translating that into monochromatic can be a bit tricky. You can just edit a photo to be black and white, but I'm just going to go a little bit with gut instinct that I feel will reflect what's here. And so these leaves over here, I'm definitely going to have be stronger. And you can sketch it out on the side if you'd like to, but I've just made a little note to myself that this might be a bit darker, maybe this area will be a little bit darker, and just very lightly noting it out to myself that that is where I want to put more ink down. I'd say in general, when it comes to deciding which areas are going to be light and dark, it's better to be a little bit more sparing at the start because you can always add a little bit more later. And so I've just noted down the ones I definitely want, but I might want a few more bits to be also popping and quite contrasting. So I might decide those as I go along. So I'm going to use a little bit of a mix of pen and brush. I think I'll start with the pen. And using one that's very light, so this is just like a 0.1. And so going in very gently, starting with this center. This little center sphere, just here, got a bit of a fuzzy texture, and so I'm sort of approaching it like literally like that. So just drawing outwards and gently tapping my pen and building it up. Just very light marks so that even if I do build it up to be a bit darker, it still feels very delicate. Like you can tell there's a very fine texture there. I try not to outline things, just because I find like the highlights show kind of more if it doesn't have a strong dark line around it. From there, I'll do the surrounding part. Unfortunately, I'm not very well versed in the names of the different parts of the flower, so I'm just going to be calling it that area. So this nice little yellow area around. I think I'm going to lay this bit up with a bit of ink from my brush too, so I'm not going to go heavy, just suggesting a bit of texture. I'm currently working on a bit of watercolour paper, and I'd say with ink in general, it's safest to work on that. If you're just using pens, there's more options and a bit more freedom, and, you know, sketchbooks and even thinner papers are perfectly fine. But because I'm using ink with water, it's going to really soak up, and a lot of other papers would just warp. And so this can handle quite a bit of moisture. So I'd say, in general, watercolour paper is safest. Okay, so I think I'm going to add a little bit of ink with my brush and going to water it down because it's all very delicate. I want it to stay quite light in comparison to the other elements. And so I've got this really, really horrible brush, but that's what gives it all the texture. And so I'm just checking on here how light my ink is. And I think that's about what I'd like. I've also got some kitchen towel with me, and that's just for blotting. It's a bit of a lifesaver because there's times where I've put ink down way too dark and just tapped it away. Now, you can't do that with your pens, but with something applied by brush on the right paper, you can take away most of it. So here, I'm just going to go in, just going round. Can always add more if I want to, so just going in. Being kind of sympathetic to the way the leaves are, well, the petals are moving, and so you can kind of, if the petal's moving like that, you can move your brush like that. Okay. So now that I've filled out my two main flowers, I think next I'm just going to work on these stems because this is what's in front. So the elements closer to you are the ones that you usually would work on first, just because the elements behind are kind of overlapping it, and so it'd be a bit awkward to work around otherwise. So I've just got like a mixed pack of pens, just like a standard pigment liner set, and it just means there's more options. And they all create slightly different textures when you shade with them. Generally with the stems, I like for the texture to be quite smooth, even if it's a little bit grainy. So I try to have quite smooth strokes, like nice and long, copying, in a way, the actual form itself. One of the reasons I actually really like doing botanical drawings is there's something quite freeing about it. And quite often, if I've worked on quite a hardcore project and it's taken a lot of time and I've had to do lots of measuring and things, it's just nice to draw something which is very forgiving. Doesn't matter if things are a little bit off, or nobody's going to notice if this leaf's a bit too big and this flower's slightly to the side. And that's part of the fun of it, really, is you don't need to be too strict. And so I wanted to show this as something which is quite an easy way of getting into ink, and quite a fun way of getting into ink as well, I'd say. I think flowers as a topic also is quite a happy topic. It's, you know, there's something that brings a smile to you, and so I'm quite a positive drawer, if you will. Like, I like drawing things that make me happy, that I enjoy, and I try to draw them in a way that kind of expresses what I like about them. So whilst I haven't exactly finished all of the stems, it's not like you can do things perfectly chronologically. You've got to look at the layout of things, and if this stem is kind of like much further back, there's not really a point in doing it now. And so I'm moving on to the leaves at the moment. Some of them are going to have a little bit more detail, and some of them are definitely going to be very simple. But I've decided I'm going quite strong on the leaves, so they're going to be quite bold. I want that contrast with the petals, and I want the flower to look more delicate in comparison. So that contrast is what makes both, in a way, stand out more. I'll do maybe this leaf here with a bit more detail, and maybe this leaf here, and then I'll see how much is needed, because sometimes you don't need as much as you think you might. There's really like an infinite number of ways that you can approach drawing a leaf, and for this case, I'm actually not fussing too much about where all of the different veins go. I'm treating it more in terms of shadow and kind of overall form. And what I'd suggest is, rather than drawing the shape first, is I'd go in and think about the tones. Think of it in terms of, you know, this block of shading, and then maybe this is a lighter block, and overall those pieces will patch up together to create the form of the leaf. Sometimes allowing myself to put patterns in, not being too literal with it, just suggesting what's there. And sometimes I'll do some as well, which are much more realistic, if you will. But for this one, which is a bit further back and behind this set of flowers, I'm just letting it be a little bit more abstract in nature. So I'm just going in, angling my pen as I put it down. Just want there to be this nice darker tone here, but I don't want it to be solid yet, because I want to be able to work on top if I need to. I think it's really important to emphasize that you can always add more, but you can't take away. So I've just got a little bit of inky water that I'm adding at the moment. It's quite a softer tone because, again, I can build it up. But I want it to feel kind of cohesive with the rest of the piece. And since I've got a mix of brushwork and line work going on, I want the pieces to overlap and the textures to layer and build, just to add a bit more depth. So if I just suddenly had a completely ink-drawn black and white leafy section here, and then this is all kind of watery brushwork, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think for this, I want it to be a little bit more integrated. Different strokes can create very different effects, and it's not like you have to choose one or the other. For this leaf, I've actually done different types. So on one side, which is quite shaded, I've gone broader strokes. And then on this other side, it's actually catching quite a bit of light. And so I'm creating this sort of dappled effect by doing very short little strokes. And I've also did these tiny little strokes in the petals just to show this kind of like rippling movement. And so it's all very flexible. I've just drawn this kind of little, I'm going to call it a pom-pom. It's not a pom-pom, but that's what I'm going to call it. And they can be a little bit difficult to approach if you've not done them before. And so I'm just going to show you with a little circle very quickly and a nice thick pen that essentially what you're doing is you've got one area which is a bit more shaded, and then with the brush stroke, you're kind of moving it to follow the shape. And so building up on one side just to create that 3D effect, so you want it to have dimension. I'm not doing big strokes, they're just almost little dashes. The area closest to you, which is, if this is the ball, this area here, this is the most kind of dotty-like, so less of a stroke and it's more of like a texture. And then as you get further to the side, it becomes a little bit more of a dash, because it's a little bit like, if these are all the little spindly hairs, the ones facing you, naturally you don't see as much of, and so as they go up, you can see a little bit more of those lines. And so there, a little pom. So I think those are really the leaves that I want to keep with more detail and texture. And the rest that I've got on here are going to be more about giving a bit of depth, adding a bit of movement. So they're just going to be a bit softer, a little bit more casually done, just building the space really. And so I think I'm going to go more with the brush. I might add a little bit of pen detail if I feel it's needed, but I think going with the brush first is the best choice. So just going to pick a brush. I'm debating, I think I'll use a mix. Some of the smaller ones I'll need something with a little bit more control, but for some parts I think I'm going to use this, because even though I don't want to layer texture on with my pen, this brush can still create a little bit of texture without it being kind of in your face. And so the point of this is it's almost a bit like a photograph which has a main focus and our subjects back around here, and to the side are going to be softer, and that contrast is going to help really show that this is the hero of our piece. So just having a nice watered down brush here, still going to have it a little bit darker than it will be actually on the paper, because I'm going to blot away. And what's quite nice when you blot it is you can kind of control where you press down more. And so again, that can help create like a gradient of tone and a little bit of a mottled effect, which just keep it from looking too flat. Trying not to be too precious about what is a leaf shape, because they're all a little bit wobbled and twisted. And so I don't mind the fact that things are a little bit wonky and distorted here. I'm just putting my brush down with different pressures to create slightly different effects. Just at the moment putting on quite a wet layer of ink. If you want to be doing kind of lots of blotting, you do need your ink to be quite wet, otherwise it's just going to go straight into the paper, and if it's too dark you might not be able to take away as much as you hope. So here I'm just going to show how I might blot this. I'm just going slightly different pressures, just gently putting on so that there's like almost a little bit of a highlight here. And then this part is shown as being a bit more shadowed. So going on, and I'm just trying to be quite playful with my brush marks. So not too even, I'm letting, as I go along, there's a little bit of a wobble. And that's just creating a nice kind of organic sort of texture. So, and I think, for me, that looks pretty finished. Now, when you're done with the piece, you can just kind of, you know, lift it away from yourself, stand up, try different angles, see if you're happy with it. But right now, I'm pretty happy with this, and I'm just going to let it dry, and then I'm going to rub out all the little pencil marks, and that'll just freshen it up and look a lot tidier. I hope you found today's session useful. Drawing flowers is such a nice way of getting into the world of ink, playing with the textures, playing with the shapes. So I do really recommend trying it for yourself. Have fun and good luck.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Morag Keister, made it through the heats of Portrait Artist of the Year with her moving depiction of author Elizabeth Day.
Morag's a really exciting young artist. I love the quality of her paint application. I like the unusual nature of the sinuous line that she gives us.
In the semi-final, her remarkable portrait of singer-songwriter Rebecca Ferguson earned her a place in the final three.
We have a regal presence here, and there's just the sense of the person, and that's what great art is about.
And it was her commissioned portrait of fiancé Genty, followed by her painting of former Deputy Chief Medical Officer Professor Jonathan Van Tam, that saw her crowned Portrait Artist of the Year 2022.
Get in there! It just has to be Morag. This is what portrait can be. It can really be fascinating and exciting and thrilling artwork.
For her winning commission, Morag painted actor, broadcaster and national treasure Sir Lenny Henry.
I'm too excited. Too excited.
Shall we?
For the National Portrait Gallery's permanent collection.
Wow. It's beautiful. I'm really chuffed.
Morag's intimate and expressive portraits begin with a silhouette drawing and a focus on body language and posture.
I'm just really trying to get a sense of you in the lines, kind of shape of your shoulders and your whole posture. That's where all the kind of information is for me.
This makes her the ideal person to lead today's masterclass. Painting with lines.
Today we're going to be making a portrait out of lines. Body language and the posture of the person are two very important things when approaching a portrait, especially in my practice. We're going to be using a small paintbrush, or if you like, a pencil or a piece of charcoal to approach this portrait today before potentially moving in with some colour. We're working with a live model today. Very lucky to have Laurie with us. And an important thing to remember when you're working with a live model, especially a nude model, is it's a living, breathing person in front of you, and to treat them with respect and make sure that they're comfortable throughout the sitting. So I'm just using some oil paint and, like I said, a very small paintbrush for this portrait. And to get started, I will just take a good look at the sitter and kind of find a natural starting point. This can sometimes be where they are sitting on the chair or the sofa, or it could be the top of the head to make sure you keep that in the composition. But actually, often for me, it's usually something like the eyebrow that feels like an anchor to begin the piece with. So I think that's what I'm gonna do with Laurie. The first mark is really quite important, so it's good to spend a bit of time thinking about that mark. And what I often find it's the most accurate and the most truthful mark that you might actually put down in the whole piece. And that's why it's a really good anchor to always return to when keeping in mind the proportion and the perspective. So once I've put that first mark down, what I usually try and do is, while I'm there and all my attention is there, I'll just spend a bit of time and energy getting in as much of the detail in this area as I can. I've just started with the eyebrow, and so I'll go along the side of the face, and then the brush will go into the hair. And I will just start to get all of those lines and strands of hair in. Apart from when my paint runs out on the brush, I actually find I don't need to take my brush off the paper too often at this stage. And I like to have the paint to run for as long as it can go. This just creates a really nice texture and variety in line density. I've pretty much always got one eye closed like that, and I squint when I'm looking at my sitter. This just really helps bring everything onto kind of one level visually, and it just simplifies what you're seeing, and it makes it easier to relay it on the paper. As we're using line today, primarily, something that you can bear in mind is a lot of the details can fall away, actually, and we can focus on just the ones that really stand out to us and feel important. And these are often the edges and the small details of things. A good way to stay in the right place is to imagine that actually you're playing a game of operation and you have to keep the line on that path. And if you think of it like that, then you can just, as you're looking at your sitter, you can take the line around and just nudge it and kind of bump it around all the little details that appear. And you'll start to realize and appreciate just how much information there is in the silhouette of a sitter. When you're doing this exercise, you'll just become really conscious of just how much information there is in the shape of a person. I really like to see how far I can take this one long line, how accurate I can keep it for the distance it travels. And then if you find that something really isn't sitting quite where you'd like it to be, then it's no problem because we're working with lines today. And the great thing about that is that you can just move over what you've already put down with more lines, and that in itself actually brings a real weight and presence to the work, and it starts to feel almost like a time-based piece. When I was painting Laurie's hand just here, it started to get a little bit confusing with the marks that I was putting down compared to all of the lines and the marks that are over there, because the hand is all kind of mixed up with this fabric. And so just to emphasize that this here is the edge of the hand, I will just go over it in a slightly heavier, denser line. And that's, for me, as much as anything, just to kind of visually, immediately remember where everything is, and that really helps keep me on track. I have this mentality when I'm painting and drawing, and it's to always return to the truth of what you're looking at. And what I mean by that is when you are struggling with a certain area, like the hand, for example, it can be so complicated and different positionings and stuff. It's a real area where people struggle. But I just look at it and I see it as a collection of lines, and that really simplifies things. And that's kind of what I mean by just looking at the truth of what you're seeing. Don't think of it as a hand, just see it as a shape and use that operation method to go around the outside of that shape and fill in any details that feel important. Something that might happen when you're going through your portrait is you'll be on one area and you'll be kind of planning to focus on that, and then you might actually just get distracted and find something else more interesting kind of halfway through that action. For example, I was just painting this arm and I was getting really into the kind of flowing motion of it, and then my paintbrush got to around here, around halfway down, and I realized that all the cloth here was kind of interesting and feeling important. And what I'd say about that is to just go with where you're being pulled and to give into those little moments that kind of drag your attention away from what you were focusing on. Because the thing is, once you've gone over the whole image and it all starts to fill in, all those lines are just going to join together, as long as you're trusting the marks that you're putting down. Okay, so at this kind of stage in the painting, it's a good time to kind of assess what you've already done and use it as an anchor to sort of map where you are or where you were and where you need to be. So just to kind of make sure everything is in proportion or it is where I'd like it to be, I'm going to go back to that first mark that I put down, which was the eyebrow here. And if I just keep focused on this point and I can just quickly scan Laurie and look back at the work that I've done. And this just really helps me see things a bit more clearly. I'm using these sort of slow, heavy, flowing lines to get in some of the details of Laurie's hair, because she's got these really nice, big kind of ringlet-style curls. And they're really, the curls are kind of separated, and that makes them really nice to draw and to outline. Okay, so I've gotten to a point in the portrait where I either don't feel like any more lines are needed, or I'm feeling maybe a little bit apprehensive to approach the features in the face. And so what I'm going to do is bring in some color. And using tiny little pieces and patches of color can really stand in for the details that you were maybe afraid to put in with the lines. It's a lot more softer, it's a bit more adaptable, and you might just feel a lot of relief being able to use a material like this in comparison to this limiting but useful tool, which is just the line. So I'm just going to take a look at Laurie and have a think about where I'd like to bring in some more detail, some detail that feels important. It's like that first line and that first mark that we made at the beginning, which was the eyebrow. In this case, the first marks you put down are so descriptive because they're in comparison to the blankness. Right now, there's a kind of blue, soft blue shadow on Laurie's shoulder, and that's what I'm going to move in with. So I'm just going to quickly mix that color. And once I've mixed that color and I feel happy that that's the color that I'm looking at, or it's close enough, what I'll do is, again, sticking with the truth of what we're seeing, I'll basically try and carve out that exact shape of the color that I'm seeing. So it's like a little patch of blue just kind of curled around the shoulder like this. So if it was like a piece that I could peel off, I'm going to kind of paint it in that way. It's not that different to working with the lines when you're approaching it in that way, you might find. You could draw the shape, and then you could fill it in, like this. Or you can just paint it as you go, kind of like this. So I'm just moving the brush around the painting as I look at Laurie and just almost trying to detect where these details are and being careful not to use it for the sake of it. It's really a case of when you find that color, put it in there. When you are moving in with color, it's really nice because you can use it to almost adjust some of those lines that you put down that maybe weren't quite in the right place. You can just barge right through those lines with the color, and the color will kind of take the center stage in those situations. Okay, I'm now going to move on to just another colour, and what's standing out to me right now is a kind of really soft yellow, kind of pastel yellow on the arm, and it's quite a big, quite a bit of a bigger patch, so I'm going to mix up quite a bit. I'm still going to keep using this little paintbrush though. It just helps keep everything feel sort of in sync. When you are doing bigger patches of colour like this, in the same way that we use the line, it's really nice to see how far you can make this part go. And you might often find, like the line, one area like this can really speak for a lot of the other details in that same area. That's why it's interesting to play with how far you can take that. And this is what I mean about being able to work into the more intimidating areas of the portrait, like the facial features, just with a few harmless bits of colour that feel much softer. You can just see that piece of detail and put it in like that. So that's just the side of the nose. And I just feel much more confident adding that in. The pressure just feels off for some reason. And often I found that people feel the same. Okay, I just mixed up a little bit of this dark, deep red colour, just for a few touches in the hair. You only really need a few little pieces of each colour for it to really start to feel vibrant and alive. And as you can kind of see, just by working with this style, first with the lines, and then when you feel like you need something a little bit more to bring in the colour, and again, to work very minimally with this approach and slowly and building it up in these stages, you can see how you could leave it somewhere, but you could also take it further. And so I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you enjoy practicing painting portraits with line.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Our tutor today is Adebanji Alade, who we first met in 2015 on the very first series of Landscape Artist of the Year. He earned a place in the competition with his submission of The Circus in Bath.
I do think that they will be very happy today because they've got trees and a building.
And at his heat in Lyme Park, Adebanji impressed us judges as well as his fellow contestants.
This is amazing. Wow. You're nearly finished.
Oh, well, a long way to go. It looks that, but because of our different styles,
good to me.
And his vibrant rendering of the landscape ensured his place on our shortlist.
Fantastic sort of reflection in the light and attention to details. Gorgeous.
It just looks like it's easy to him. It's amazing.
He weaves his love of figurative work into his landscapes to give a sense of captured moments.
I love people. Everything about people, it helps me when I paint outside too.
Making him the perfect guide for today's masterclass, Figures in Landscapes.
Today I'm going to be showing you something I really love doing in my painting, putting figures into a landscape. Some of you might find this a little bit daunting, but I'm going to share tips on how to do this effectively. So I've got my reference picture here, and I've got a landscape that is in progress, and I'm going to be putting the figures in by, first of all, sketching the outlines in a very organic way. I'm going to be sketching in a brownish reddish color. And the reason why I'm using brownish red is that most of the colors in the landscape are greenish, and red and brown are complementary colors to this landscape. So it's actually going to show and stand out more. I'm going to start with the first figure right here. And the first thing I need to do is to make sure I know where their heads are. Because when you're sketching a figure, you want to make sure you know, when you're looking, where the heads are, the level of the heads. And the first figure, I've just realized somewhere along where this tree is where this figure's head is. I also want to know where his legs end, so I know, because that's very quickly I'm going to just figure out what's going to be the top of his head and where is going to be the bottom of his feet. And I'm just sketching this straight on, naturally, organically. I'm not even using any sort of grid method or anything. It's just freehand sketching. So at this point, I've got the main features, his head, the foot, the legs, and the torso. That's enough for me. But when I start blocking in the silhouette now, you're going to see it's going to make sense. So let's go for the silhouette. And I'm going to use a dark color for that, which would be some burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Just a few quick touches and very lightly. Now I'm going to refine him by putting in colors. And this, because I've already got a base, and the base is already enough for me to work on, now I can start adding color. And the color that I'll be adding in this particular stage, it's not going to be detailed color. It's just blocks and blobs of strokes to define each part of him. Like for the head, it will be like one stroke or two. For the torso, one stroke or two, just to keep it fluid enough. For his hands and head, I'm going to mix a quick skin tone, which will be yellow ochre, white, and a bit of red. Just a basic skin tone. And it has a little bit of sunlight hitting it, so I'm going to add some lemon yellow to that. So for the head, you can see where I am now. It's just one quick stroke like that. Not more than that, just a very quick stroke. And the reason why I don't want anything feeling overworked. The hands, just quickly a stroke, and then the second hand, quickly a stroke. So you can see that nothing is overworked. I want the figure to feel naturally as if they were moving. So no details, nothing, just fluid strokes to show a figure in motion. So now I'm going to the torso. He's wearing greenish, sort of an olivey green. I'm going to mix that color slightly, but I'm going to make it lighter so it stands out, because the part of where he is a bit dark. So let's get a nice olivey color in there. Just mix this color in. I'm going for his shoulder level, his arm level, where his chest is, at the other shoulder bit, a little stroke that joins up with his hand, where his whole belly is, just very quickly putting that in, and the arm that flows right here. So everything has this sort of immediacy to it. I'm just going to quickly add some darks that define. These darks define where, you know, there's some creases. And they don't have to be so many, just a few. Okay, we're now going for his trousers now, which are dark blue. There's two tones to those trousers. There's where the leg goes back, which is a dark tone, and the main thrust of his trousers, which is like a denim blue. So this is a tonal shift, just something going from a mid-tone to a dark tone. There's two things I'm demonstrating. I'm demonstrating the light hitting him, and I'm also demonstrating movement. One thing you would notice in this figure is that he has feet. But watch what I do when it gets to the feet. I'm not going to put the full feet in. I am just going to swipe a tone, which is like a dark tone, and it's just going to be very, very lightly touched, like that. You can see that I haven't put the feet in. The feet were there, but I've hardly touched it. And I'm going to go for some of the ground color. I'm going to mix a ground color, just the color of the ground around where he is. And I'm going to make sure I flick that around it somewhere here. So it shows a little bit of him in motion. There's a little bit more to this. There's a slight shadow under his head. And I just need to mix a dark line, just a simple dark line, just to show that demarcation right there. Let's just work on a little bit of his hands and how they drop to the side. But apart from that, I'm leaving this figure in this form and in this shape, just how he is now. So for now, I'm going to work on the negative shape in between his feet, and there's some shrubs at the back. And then finally, making sure that there's a nice shadow that is cast behind him, because that gives this figure a little bit of presence. If there's shadows, make sure you put the shadows so it feels like he's present there. So now I'm moving on to the next figure, and what is so important, because this figure is in front, is that I'm going to be making sure that I get the proportions right. So I'm going to be working on the sketch, because the sketch is so important to get the right movement that he has. And hopefully when we do this, you're going to see how it moves again from the sketch to the silhouette to bringing out the color. Let's go. So I've got the head, and there's a way this figure it's just a very loose t-shirt he has on. You can see me just going and flowing with it. No real pressure. The main thing is the angle at which that leg in front moves. There's a lovely angle to it. It shows that that leg is in front, and there's a slight leg at the back. It just helps to make this work. First feeling of the hands right there. We just want to make sure we get all that movement of his hand, the angle of his leg, and the straightness of the arm. So now that I've got the figure in place, I'm going to block him in with some dark tones. Because he's prominent, I'm also going to add the shadow that he casts. Just because he's all in dark, I can also add that shadow. I'm looking at the color of the ground, and the color of the ground is what I'm going to work with this particular figure, just so that it feels part of the floor and not foreign. So I'm just mixing this dark tone. I'm just going to pull this shadow and pull this shadow across, so it will feel like he's there just before I start painting, because I'm still with this dark, and I'm going to flow that in, just feel that in as I go along. There's hands cast a shadow. You can see that hand on the floor at the back there. It wouldn't show that much. It's not going to show that much now until I start putting the real colors in, and then it will feel more natural. So as we did at the beginning, I'm going to mix a skin tone, just one stroke for each area, not overworking anything, just like the face, one tone, one stroke, not overworking it. I like the bend of his head, so keeping it just steady. I don't think I have the right brush, because that brush makes me fiddly. I want a brush, not maybe this like square one. It just gives me the opportunity to just place the stroke at once and leave it like that. And then the neck comes in, just one stroke. So everything is done, again, very lightly. And now let's go into what he's wearing. I'm just gonna swing again, straight strokes, one touch down. So in here, in there, just very light touches. So all this I'm working on now are the negative shapes, just the negative shapes, things that are not the figure itself, but things around the figure. And if you notice again, I'm not going to put any sort of feet in that area. I'm just going to make sure it feels fluid, just as it goes across, fluid. So you can see how the touches come in. It's hardly going to exist. I'm just going to make it feel like it's just touched the floor, nothing more. So I'm going to go for the next figure now. I'm mainly going to work on the brush strokes and how this helps the figure to really come to life. So the brush I'm using now is a filbert, and what it does, it helps me to get the right sort of shape or the right kind of stroke on the surface. It won't be too squared and it won't be too harsh. It just gives me the right kind of touch that I need. So it can give me two kind of strokes. It can give me a sharp stroke and just a smooth stroke. And that's what I'm going to be using while working on this figure. All the figures that I'm going to be dealing with now are very small in the proportion to the landscape and everything. So it's just tiny little touches, and that will do. I don't have black on my palette, so I always tend to mix all the dark colors on my palette to give me the dark I need for a black. And that's what I've done now, just ultramarine, alizarin, burnt sienna. Just gonna put the hair around where she is. Whenever I make a mistake, I tend not to worry or freak out. I just scrape it off with the back of my brush like that. You know, that's kind of like an erasing effect, and it just helps me as I go along. And now let's go on to some light tones as I'm working on this. Some light tones around, that's the negative space around where she is, so that her dark hair can show. And that's what I've seen in the background, is there's some light colors just around there. That will help, you know, frame the face. And now I'm gonna go for trousers. Let's go. There's a nice shadow. And that's more like moving us into the next figure, because we don't see the full figure of this particular figure. We don't see the fullness. I think there's a place where the next figure has definitely come in front. So we're gonna have to have her just slightly off and then just move straight into the next figure, because we don't see the whole of her. She's cut in, definitely. This figure I'm working on now, there's a lot of detail in the top shawl that she's got on the top coat. Now, I can't pick out all that detail, but what I am gonna do is to give an overall impression of those marks. Just brief little shapes and marks. I see just little strokes of red, and I'm just gonna place them. As I'm painting, you're gonna notice that most of the strokes I'm pulling, they just flow. And sometimes it might look as if, you know, this is something that I make to look a little bit like straightforward or easy, but it's come from years and years of practice, honing this skill, especially the sketching side of things. So what I recommend, if you wanna really up your game with your figures and make them feel good and feel right, you're gonna need to sketch and sketch every day. And I'm telling you, it will really help. There are some figures behind that don't show that much. And those figures, I'm just gonna use blobs of paint to represent them. So they're not gonna be defined at all. There's only one last figure that's defined, and it's not much detail. And so because of that, I'm just gonna go straight into the figure with the shape of the color. There's no need to start to sketch it or try to refine it. The four main figures in front, they've got the hold on the scene. Now I just need to go straight into the colors for these ones and work that out. I've looked at the whole thing, and the main figures are really in the place I want them to be. And now I'm just going to tie the whole landscape together and make it work. So I'm really pleased with how this has gone today. I like the fact that the figures have presence in the landscape. I'm also happy about the way the shadows show that they're actually there with the light hitting them. The figures are moving. You notice that there's some dynamism in the feet. Nothing is stiff or still. And I hope this will help you not to be apprehensive in putting figures into your landscape, but will give you the confidence to just try it.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.